All right, good morning, everybody. I have 11 o'clock. We're going to go ahead and get started. We are recording this session, so go ahead and click continue. You should have got notification that we started the recording. My name is Jenny Lobb. I'm a family and consumer sciences educator in Franklin County, and I am excited to be here with you this morning to talk about beating the winter blues by unplugging. So if you joined us last week, Shannon, who was the presenter, shared a lot of great ways that you can beat the winter blues by taking care of yourself. And these next 3 weeks, we're going to take a deeper dive into 3 of those strategies. And today's topic is unplugging. So in our time this morning, I'll share briefly some concerns that are associated with too much screen use. I'll share where to locate some expert guidelines regarding screen use if you want to learn more about those, and then some strategies for setting guidelines around screen use for both you and the rest of your family if you have children and you're concerned about their screen use, or maybe it's a spouse or another family member. I saw some comments coming in the chat as we were waiting to get started that some of you are hoping to learn information today you can share with other family members or even clientele that you work with. So whatever your motivation, thank you for joining us today. I'm going to frame our talk this morning by introducing a phrase called digital detoxing. And digital detoxing is not a new thing. It's something I've been teaching for a few years now. It's defined as the act of refraining for a period of time from electronic devices like smartphones and computers. And it doesn't have to be a week-long or a month-long venture off the grid, out into the wilderness where you don't have access or service to your devices. Although that can certainly be nice and beneficial if you do have the opportunity to plan an extended vacation. But there are things you can do in the context of your daily life to unplug and take a break from electronics and practice what we will refer to as digital detoxing. And we know that this is important because while technology has a lot of positive uses and benefits us in many ways, especially in this context where most everything has gone virtual. We're working virtually, we're doing school virtually. At the beginning of the pandemic, many of us were even doing self-care activities like doing exercise classes online, and maybe you still are. Technology has helped us stay connected to others. Technology has a lot of positive uses. However, the overuse of technology can have some consequences. And so this morning, this is not going to be an exhaustive list in any way, but I want to share just a few ways that the overuse of technology can impact our mental health. And one of those ways is technology impacts our sleep. It can impact the amount of sleep that we get, as well as how well we sleep. And I don't know about you, but when I don't get a good night's sleep, I'm typically less positive. I have a less positive outlook. I may be more irritable or impatient, and that's not good for my mental health. In fact, last week in Shannon's talk, she actually mentioned getting a full night's sleep as one self-care strategy that could help you beat the winter blues. So I want to kind of build on that just a little bit this morning by sharing that our technology use can actually impact our sleep quality and quantity. It's kind of easy to understand how technology could impact your sleeping hours if you're up late watching a show or using a device and not going to bed because you're on your device. That eats into your sleeping time. Similarly, if you wake up in the middle of the night, maybe you have a device next to you when you're in bed and you glance at it to check the time. Sometimes there are notifications there, and that can kind of wake up your brain and make it hard to get back to sleep. Sometimes it's easy to go down a rabbit hole and get into things you weren't intending to be reading in the middle of the night when you see those notifications there. And technology can also impact sleep quality because this has to do with the backlight that comes from our devices. There's some research suggesting that the light emitted by our devices can disrupt melatonin. And again, melatonin is a neurotransmitter that helps regulate our sleep cycle. And so for some people who are more sensitive to those disruptions in melatonin, using technology before bed can really wreak havoc on your sleeping and your sleep cycle. So an action step for you, if you feel like maybe you're impacted by that, could be trying to avoid technology, the use of technology an hour or two before bed. Or maybe create a docking station outside of your bedroom to leave devices outside of the bedroom and help you get a better night's sleep. You might have to invest in an alarm clock if you're someone who uses your phone as an alarm clock, but maybe that's an easy action step that could help with your sleep. Another way that technology can impact our mental health is that it can actually impact our memory and our attention span and our ability to learn. We encounter a lot of information each day, and our brains just aren't wired to handle it all. One analogy I like to use to describe this is imagine walking into a bookstore or a library where all the books are reading themselves out loud at once. That's kind of like, in a way, what it's like to walk around in the world today where there's just news and information everywhere all the time. We just physically can't process it all. Our brains can't handle all of that. And so when we try to take in too much, our brains adapt by maybe filtering out what may be less important, but this impacts our ability to take in information in the first place and then to recall that information later on. So the overuse of technology in the sense that you're trying to do too much can actually impact what you're able to learn and then what you're able to remember and what you focus your attention on at any given time. The amount of information we encounter on a daily basis is also stressful in and of itself, but a lot of our information is accompanied by notifications as well. And there's some research to suggest that those notifications that come in can actually cause a mild fight or flight response in the body. There's a release of cortisol, which is one of those hormones associated with the stress response. And so if you're getting constant notifications or frequent notifications, that really can contribute to your stress level in a physiological way over time. So maybe an action step here would be trying to turn off notifications, as many as you're able. I know on my personal phone, I have almost all notifications turned off except for phone calls and text messages. I don't get notifications for email. I don't get notifications for social media apps. I do have those apps and I will open them and check them on my own time as I want to, but I don't get notifications for those things. If you're at work, trying to minimize notifications, turning off the volume can sometimes be helpful in and of itself, but you might take it a step farther and turn off notifications for email, for example, if you're trying to work on a project and want some undistracted work time. That can help minimize some of the stress that comes from the constant notifications and the information overwhelm. And then the final thing I'll mention this morning is that technology can actually limit some of our in-person communication. Technology is very helpful in helping to keep us connected with people outside of our immediate household, especially right now. Um, but there's been some research done showing that when you are in the presence of another person, the presence of a device, especially a phone, can actually limit the depth of your conversation. There was a study done by a researcher named Sherry Turkle at MIT, and she observed couples at the dinner table and found that if there was a device present at the table, even if it was silenced or turned upside down, the level of conversation was not nearly as deep as compared to when there was no device present. And the thought there is that just having a device in sight can signal to the other people in your company that they could be interrupted by someone not in the room at any given time. And so unconsciously, we may not share as much important or intimate information because we don't want to be interrupted by someone else. So that's just one way that technology can limit some of that in-person communication. But just think, maybe this is a familiar scenario to you too. How often do we sit around in a room with other people, but rather than engaging in conversation with one another or doing an activity together, we're each absorbed in a different device. So technology can enhance communication in some ways and limit it in others. So again, these are not exhaustive by any means. I just wanted to share a few of the ways that technology use can impact our mental and social health, but really share some ways that you could start to think about your technology use and take some steps to use technology to your benefit and try to minimize some of those consequences. And one philosophy I might suggest just to start thinking about how you might go about doing this is digital minimalism. Digital minimalism is an approach that comes from a professor from Georgetown University, Cal Newport, and he defines this as a philosophy of technology use in which you focus your online time on a small number of carefully selected and optimized activities that strongly support what you value, and then you happily miss out on everything else. So this might take some work. It might take some what we like to call decluttering, some digital decluttering. You have to think about how you use technology in ways that support you, and what might just be clutter or noise in your life. What might you be able to minimize or get rid of? It might be cutting out the news. Maybe deleting some apps from your phone if you're someone who, out of habit picks up your phone and often goes and checks the news or checks social media. Maybe deleting those apps and only looking those things up using a web browser. That could be an action step. Maybe just, trying to minimalize the number of people or organizations you follow on social media or the number of newsletters you subscribe to. It's a way to start thinking about the information and the content you're consuming regularly, and whether what you're taking in is supportive of your personal values and what you want to invest your time in doing. Another way of thinking about this is aiming for depth in a world of breadth. So as I mentioned, we encounter a lot of information each day. We can't absorb it all. So again, you want to think about what is most important to you and go deep in those areas. Really focus your time and attention on the content that matters, the things that are important. And you could think about this using the analogy of a garden. We just as in a garden, you would want to grow beautiful flowers or nice, delicious vegetables, and you want to get rid of the weeds. You want to treat your mind the same way. be careful about what you introduce and allow to grow there. Get rid of some of the weeds and the noise and the junk. So these are a couple of overarching strategies to start thinking about how you might approach your own technology use. To give you some more practical ways to actually start unplugging, I have a few suggestions listed out, and some of these may sound familiar if you tuned into Shannon's introductory session last week. She talked a little bit about mindfulness. Mindfulness is a way to focus your attention purposefully in the present moment, using your senses to notice what's going on in the world around you, what you're thinking and feeling, the physical sensations in your own body. And it's really hard to practice mindfulness if you are distracted by a screen. So maybe trying to establish a regular mindfulness practice could be one practical way to unplug. If you commit to practicing mindfulness regularly, that's time in your day you've carved out to take a break from the screen. Similarly, taking a break to go outside. Some of our devices are portable and it's possible to take them with you outside, but this is a strategy where truly the action step would be leaving the devices at home and going outside to get some natural light. So one of the strategies also that Shannon mentioned last week that can be really, really helpful when we talk about beating the winter blues is getting some exposure to natural light. Even just 5-10 minutes a day, getting some daylight can help to reset those brain chemistry changes that happen this time of year. So taking some time in your day to unplug, go outside, maybe taking a walk where you're practicing mindfulness and noticing what's going on, doing some physical activity outside. That might be one way to unplug. Another way you might unplug regularly is building in stretch or activity breaks into your day. So even if you don't get outside, taking time to give your eyes, your body a break from the screen, to stretch or do some physical activity can be really helpful, both physically and mentally. And in fact, the session next week is going to be all about how physical activity is a strategy in and of itself that you could use to beat the winter blues. But here I just want to mention, our bodies have ways of telling us when we need a break from the screen. Maybe you've experienced eye strain or headaches, maybe aches and pains from sitting in front of a screen too long, or aches in your neck or shoulders because you're looking down at a screen too long. So taking time, if you're someone who works at a computer, I would say hourly. Actually, the recommendation from the American Ophthalmological Association is every 20 minutes, give your eyes a break from the screen and look at something 20 feet away for 20 seconds. It's called the 20-20-20 rule. So giving your eyes a break from the screen, getting up to stretch, maybe do some neck stretches or some easy yoga poses, or just take a walk up and down the hallway or around the block. Taking time to stretch and get in some activity could be one way to unplug. Taking time to engage in a hobby that you enjoy, or maybe finding a new hobby could be a way to unplug. So this would be replacing some of your screen time with something that you enjoy doing that doesn't involve a screen, maybe playing an instrument or doing a craft or creating some sort of artwork. Those are all unplugged ways to enjoy other hobbies in life. And then the final one I'll mention is embracing solitude. So solitude is described, solitude is not the same as loneliness. Here in this time that we're in, we think about loneliness and isolation and those being negative things, and they are in many ways, but solitude is different because solitude is intentional alone time. Loneliness is described as the pain of being alone when company is desired, whereas solitude is intentional alone time that you take for yourself and have some opportunity to just let your brain wander, freely flow, maybe come up with some creative ideas. And one easy way to start embracing solitude would be to think about times when you are alone, where you might be tempted to pull out your phone to pass the time, maybe waiting in line somewhere, or sitting in a waiting room, or even when you stop at a traffic light. It's easy to pull out our phones in those times and, just check the news, check social media, just see what's going on. But that can be one place to just start trying to get comfortable with being comfortable with your own thoughts, and to give yourself a little bit of a break from the screen. So those are a few strategies, some practical ways you might engage in unplugging. I did also want to share, as I said I would, some online resources if you want to learn more. The American Academy of Pediatrics has a really nice website where they list some screen use guidelines for children of all ages, but they also have an interactive tool where you can go and create a personalized media use plan. So if you are a parent and you're worried about how your children are utilizing screens, I would encourage you to check this out. Try to come up with a family media use plan that benefits everyone in your household. So you are role modeling good behaviors, you're encouraging your children to use screens in healthy ways as well. There's also a couple of really nice resources I encountered this summer designed for parents of teenagers. We hear, at least I've heard as I've kind of taken a deeper dive into some of this research, that there's an association between screen use and mental health concerns in teenagers. And while that's true, some of these researchers and these reports bring up the point that it's a correlation. We don't know which way it goes. So oftentimes parents, have these screen use guidelines that they try to impose on their children. And sometimes a fight will ensue over those screen use guidelines. And these researchers bring up the point that, perhaps sometimes that fight over the screen is more damaging than the actual screen itself. So one resource that could be really helpful if you're parenting a teenager is called Dear Parents. And this comes from the Children's Screen Time Action Network in conjunction with Campaign for a Commercial-Free Childhood. And they put together some recommendations with the input of teenagers about how to go about setting screen use guidelines with the input of your children, so that all can agree to that media use plan. And then another really interesting report that I believe would be a worthwhile read if you have children in this age range is Teens, Tech and Mental Health from Common Sense Media. And this is where they really emphasize that point about that correlation between screen use and mental health, and how for many teenagers, the screen, it can be a coping mechanism in some ways. And so you have to be careful when you're creating guidelines to allow for your children to use the screen in beneficial ways as a coping mechanism, but also try to limit some of the noise and the junk that we ourselves are trying to limit in our lives too. So I just wanted to share those resources so they're out there if they might be beneficial to you. Regardless of who you are, whether you have children, an approach that I think works well for everybody is the 3C approach. When you're thinking about setting screen use guidelines for yourself or for a child, you can think about the content, the context, and either the child or yourself. The first one is content. So is what you're consuming through your screen high quality? Is it helpful? Is it beneficial? Or is it just more for entertainment purposes, or maybe a distraction or just more the noise and junk that isn't really helpful or necessary. That's one thing to consider. Another thing to consider is the context. And you can think about this by asking the question, what is the screen displacing? And honestly, in our current context, the screen probably isn't displacing a whole lot. As I mentioned, many of us are working virtually, we're going to school virtually, we're using the screen for things that we want and need to do. But in maybe more normal times or in times outside of work and school, are you using the screen in place of maybe doing a physical activity? Is it something that you're using to pass the time during a long car trip, or is it something that you're just, spending all evening after work or school doing, where you could be connecting with others, engaging in some sort of self-care activity? So thinking about the context and what the screen might be displacing can be helpful. And then finally, thinking about yourself or your child and your individual needs. If you're someone who's more anxiety prone, maybe avoiding the news might be beneficial. If you or your child has special learning needs, then maybe technology is very helpful and necessary. So you can also consider these 3 C's when you think about how you might evaluate your own screen use, how it might be beneficial and necessary, and what you might be able to let go. So with that, I know I've given you a lot of information in the short time we've had together so far. I am happy to answer any questions that you have at this point in time. You can either type those in the chat or use the Q&A feature. My contact information is right there if you want to follow up with me one-on-one for any reason. And I'll also share that next week, our session will be on beating the blues with exercise. So I encourage you to come back and tune in for that one with Misty. Just trying to scroll through some of the comments that you may have posted while I was presenting. I see someone shared that trying to limit devices at the dinner table is a helpful strategy. Absolutely. That can be a really good place to limit screen use. Oh, I see the suggestion of digital health timers and the settings that are available on many devices. You can put a time, you can set the settings on your device or within an app to alert you or cut you off when you've spent a certain amount of time engaged in an app, and those can be helpful as well. Yeah, thanks for sharing your personal strategies. All right, well, I don't see anything else coming in, so I'm going to go ahead and stop the recording. And again, encourage you to join us next week